Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut Remix channel. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the 2022 Mazda CX-5. We're going to take a look under the hood, some technical specifications. We're going to look inside, outside. We'll take it for a quick test drive to see how does the CX-5 hold up in 2022. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. If you are a returning subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's start our technical tour under the hood with the engine. This is a 2.5 liter direct injected only turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. Named SkyActiv G, that is the family of engines, and there is a lot of technology associated with that SkyActiv G. We're going to discuss a few of them in this video. The first thing and the biggest important thing about this engine is this is a Miller cycle engine. To make a long story short, and I'll give you the simplest explanation for something that is extremely complicated. The Miller cycle, when the piston is coming down for the intake stroke to pull air into the engine, usually at the end of this intake stroke, as the compression stroke starts, the intake valve is closed to compress that charge. Well, in the Miller cycle, that valve sticks open, and some of that charge goes back into the intake, and then the intake valve closes late, and it's basically a small compression. It doesn't make a huge compression cycle, it's a small compression cycle. That has huge benefits for fuel efficiency, for emissions, and for many other things. And this is something that actually they're experimenting with. They've done it really well. They've done a lot more. We're going to talk about it. Let's talk about some engine mechanical stuff, because this engine actually, with all the technology that it is relatively on the simple side. It does not have valve lift, so it has two camshafts. Things are simple. You have hydraulic lifters, you have roller followers, and a design that many manufacturers use very successfully because there's no overcomplication here. This is a timing chain driven engine. It has two chains. One of them is for the cams to the crankshaft, and the other one is to drive the oil pump. The timing tensioners, they're internal. That means if you remove that front timing cover on the engine, you do not have to do anything with the timing. They're internal. They're not through the timing cover, if you would, like some older engines. We're seeing a lot of newer engines are using this style design because it's actually much better for serviceability and it's more durable. Now, because this is a 4-cylinder engine, you have a balance shaft or balancer assembly unit underneath the crankshaft. This is very standard, nothing different about this. Most 4-cylinder engines will have this, and life is great there. But where things are anything but simple or old school in a way is the variable valve timing. Now, the exhaust side is simple, is oil controlled, so basically oil pressure changes the timing a little bit on the exhaust camshaft and life is good. But on the intake, this is when things go to the next era, to the next level, and something that is interesting about this. Now, before we start talking about it, I have to point out one thing. The design of the intake, which we're going to talk about here, is exactly the same as Toyota's new dynamic force engine. Many rumors that Toyota and Mazda co-developed this technology together, or there's actually more rumors that Mazda developed this and Toyota bought it from them, because it is actually brilliant. Here's how this works, and there's actual data that this has actually been out a little bit earlier, so not my department who invented what, but we're going to talk about it. So the intake does not have oil control to control the variable valve timing. Instead, we have an electric motor that sits in the face of the camshaft. That motor is always spinning. I know that sounds scary, but these things have been pretty reliable, these motors at least. The camshaft is spinning, let's say at 1000 RPM, that motor is spinning at 1000 RPM. When you want to advance the timing, that motor will actually speed up and advance the timing. When you want to retard the timing, that motor will slow down to retard the timing. Pretty cool, pretty interesting, because now you have infinite micro control over where that valve timing is. And you can, because of that, because you have that big control, you can vary the valve timing significantly more than before with the old school oil controlled system. People have said this design is overcomplicated, it's gonna break, and it's gonna cause all issues, but actually it has less chances of breaking, believe it or not, because oil gets dirty, oil passages get clogged, and that's usually you're controlling a mechanical action or a fluid action with electronics. But here, there's only one motor and one gear. That's it. There's no more parts. The rest is electronically controlled. If the motor goes out, it's right there, comes right out. You don't have to be tearing into the engine. And if there's oil contamination, it's not going to affect it. So there are benefits as well as downsides, because this thing is a little complicated. That scares people, scares older mechanics that are not familiar with this new technology, but it is actually, if you really look hard, it is actually better. Now this engine is turbocharged, and Mazda has had a slight dark history with turbocharging, mainly because they were associated with Ford. Ford does not make the most reliable cars in the planet, or on this side of the pond, or on your neighborhood street. But things hopefully will get better, because this is turbocharged. Just like the olden days, there are some nightmares with Mazda and turbos, but they are back at it. They let it go for a while, but they're back. Now, one thing that is interesting about this same engine is actually used in other models, but because this CX-5 is actually not a new generation, it's been out for a while, this actually has an air-to-air intercooler. Some other models that have the same engine, same turbo, will have an air-to-liquid intercooler, which is better, more compact, actually more efficient. But this has a little bit of an older school design intercooler. Because of the nightmares of the past with Mazda and turbocharging, maintenance is key here, folks. And even in the past, when they had issues with the CX-7 and what other models with that same engine and turbo, maintenance is key. And understanding that you can't just be driving the car very hard and come to a stop, shut it off, and walk away. You're gonna cook the seals, and you're gonna cook that oil in the turbo. So a little bit of care to prolong these turbos is needed. Many manufacturers are using turbos. Actually, very few are still not using turbos. So understanding what you need to do to prolong these turbos' lives is crucial in succeeding to do that. Let's talk about the transmission. And the transmission in the CX-5 2022 model is a 6-speed conventional automatic transmission. But Mazda is not the kind of company that does conventional very well. They're always thinking outside the box. They're super innovators. Now, the era they had with Ford was not good. That innovation was not being executed properly, and it was not good. But now they're back. And it has been really a kind of a rebirth of a manufacturer that pushed on the rotary engine. This is a company that was really innovative back in its day, and now we're seeing it back, which is really good. Here's what they did with the automatic transmission. They wanted to get better gas mileage, but how do we do that? They were looking at everybody else. Toyota's going with 8-speed transmissions, Honda's going with CVTs, and Hyundai has gone down the dark street of DCTs, dual clutch transmissions. They knew this is Mazda, they can do it better. So they took a conventional, actually old school, 6-speed transmission that was beautiful. They didn't want to change it because it's reliable and it's well made. They changed how it works. They took that torque converter. Typically, torque converters, a fluid coupler, when you stop at a traffic light, the engine is turning and the transmission is stopped. There's fluid between them. But when you start driving, that motion of the fluid will start turning the other side, and now we're going. The simplest terms, let's keep things simple. But all torque converters in all cars will have a clutch that when you get to higher speeds, it'll engage, so you wouldn't have that loss of the fluid motion to make it a direct connection, so you wouldn't have loss of the engine power. But Mazda took it to the next level. They took that very generic, very old school design of the torque converter clutch, throw it out, put a multi-disc clutch, and put a proper solenoid that engages them. And now, as soon as you take off, you basically bypass the torque converter. solid engagement, and off we go. The minute you come to a stop, you're slowing down, that disengages, and now you have an old school torque converter again. Brilliant design. This works because all of this stuff that I told you about, they're all inside the torque converter. We already have a clutch in the torque converter. Why don't we utilize it in a better way? And they have, and it's brilliant. And you really see this when you drive this car. It doesn't feel weird. It feels like a normal transmission. It doesn't hunt for gears because it has 17 gear shifts. It doesn't feel clunky like a DCT. It doesn't scream like a CVT. It's just beautiful and it works. And you know what? You got the good efficiency out of it. I love this transmission and it is a brilliant design. And then the all-wheel drive system. If you read in the book, it's all this, oh, we have all this technology in the all-wheel drive system and it helps the cornering and helps. Okay, let's just speak brass tacks, if you would. This is actually a very old school all-wheel drive system. Nothing wrong with that. Seems like auto manufacturers, they love to make their cars look more technologically and more advanced, but sometimes people just want them to work, and this works. You have a old school chunk of metal type mechanical transfer case, no electronics, no clutches, nothing. It's just a good old chunk of metal transfer case. Works great. That goes to the rear differential, which has a coupler, a magnetic coupler, a clutch that engages and disengages as needed. That's it. Very simple design. For the most time that you're driving this car, it's actually two-wheel drive, because if you don't need it, why is it going all-wheel drive and creating more drag and dragging down your fuel economy? Very good design that have been used by many manufacturers. Some of them decided, oh, we gotta make it cool, make it more complicated, and they actually had problems. But this design is historic, it is great, and it works really well for a car in this segment. And I'm glad to see it still here. Let's talk about the exterior of the Mazda CX-5 and something to be said about the Mazda CX-5 and actually other modern Mazdas. They always have this sharp, sophisticated, chiseled look to them. I just love it. And you know what? Sometimes in life, less is more. And this is what Mazda does really well. Now, even though this has been out for a while, I know they updated in 2022, made it look a little better, changed the mascara and whatnot, but it still basically looks almost the same. But the reason it has aged so well and it looks so nice because less is more. They did not go all out with the design. It's a very simple design, looks like a box. They kind of smoothed the edges of the box, made it look good. They didn't go all crazy with the lines and the design. No, they're actually very conservative, very classic lines that I think every car should have. They're very basic lines, folks. There's not much going on in the body here. And one more thing, and there's a theme with this, that more than just being conservative, they did not make the design to compromise function. Because after all, you don't buy this because it's a showpiece museum car. You buy this because you need to get your family around. And having this basic design actually helps. It doesn't block your visibility to a point. Talk about that in a little bit. It doesn't rob you of space because, oh, I have to have this curved roof. It's actually great. And I love it for that. One thing here, the mirror. It's huge. So you can see very well. Some cars will get you these tiny little mirrors that look really cool, but now you can't see anything. No. We have an enormous mirror here. And it's beautiful. And it works. And I don't care if it kind of doesn't match the side. I want to see, and I can see, and I love that. And something else that is interesting, you have this little red mark on the grille. You know, maybe when they redesigned it, it spilled a little bit of paint, but there is a strange mark on the grille that is red. If that's the strangest thing on the outside, we're okay with that. But more importantly, the emblem. See, most modern cars utilize a radar sensor for pre-collision, for adaptive cruise control, whatever you want to call it. Usually, it either sits here or somewhere in the grille. In this case, it does sit here. Unfortunately, we still have it. Unlike Honda, we reviewed the Civic a few weeks ago, and it got rid of it altogether. But we still have it. But there's a twist that is important. The radar sensor on this Mazda actually sits behind it quite a bit behind it, not immediately behind it like some manufacturers. There's a big gap between them. And why is that important, you ask? Well, here's why. When you get in a tiny accident in modern cars, let's say somebody backed into you, broke this grill, pushed this in, you immediately damage the radar sensor. That's super expensive, and the calibration and all the mess that goes behind it. But in this, if you get in a tiny accident, somebody backed into you, the radar sensor is fine because there's a big gap between them. So all you do is just replace the grill, replace the emblem, and off you go. Kind of like how it used to be before radar sensors. This is really good engineering, and I like it. Let's talk about the interior of the Mazda CX-5. Even though this interior is slightly showing its age, but it shows you one thing. The initial design of this interior was so brilliant, it kind of followed that same theme of the exterior of less is more. This is exactly it. The one thing that is very nice about this, and when I say it's aging, I don't say it in a bad way. See, in the olden days, when you got in an SUV, you were high up, the dash was small, it almost felt like the dash was very long. And you feel that feeling here. I mean, the dash is small and the windshield is actually close to you. You're more forward in the car than normal because modern cars are going toward that swooping roof line and the windshield is super slanted and you have this giant dash in front of you and everything is like this. This is just flat. The windshield is close, the dash is small. Beautiful. It works. And as a byproduct of that, there are some certain things that are interesting in this. Like the AC vents, they're low. They're not to your face height because the dash is not just this giant estate. It's actually small. And they're lower than you. And the HVAC controls, they're actually down here. Usually, they put them in front of the shifter, but they're a little bit higher than the shifter. In this, they're low because the dash is long. Pretty interesting design. It's really hard to explain it. I'll try to show it to you in the videos here, but it's an interesting feeling. When you sit here, it just feels different. Most SUVs in this segment, they went with all the crazy designs, but this has like a good old school feel to it, and I love it. It works, and that's what matters. People are so consumed with interiors that have to be cool and angular and crazy, and they then start complaining about them not being functional because of this design. This doesn't have that. This is just an honest-to-God, simple interior that works, and I love it for that. Now, the gauge cluster has something that is interesting. It is a very basic gauge cluster. You look at it when it's on, doesn't look like much. But actually the middle is all a screen, and unnecessarily, honestly, I'll say. They could have gotten away with a smaller screen, would have been fine, but again, they're trying to keep up with the craze of modernness, with the screens that do nothing. This screen does nothing. Shows you a little bit of information here and there, but other than that, it doesn't do anything. But something interesting about the gauge is you almost have two fuel gauges. You have the conventional mechanical fuel gauge, and then you have another gauge that, to me, looks like a fuel gauge. It's basically telling you how much miles you have left, but essentially it looks like a fuel gauge. See, this is why when we take an older car and start modernizing it, things like that get missed. You basically have two fuel gauges. Totally unnecessary, but it's okay. It doesn't affect the function. And the materials here, there's no exotic materials here. Again, for a car in this segment, you don't need very high-end materials. But the materials are nice. There's no surface that you touch that feels cheap or flimsy. It's actually very nice. They were very proud with the refresh that now we have red stitching. Honestly, if you're shopping for a car in this segment, you care about red stitching and all this stuff, this is the kind of stuff that only drives the price of the car up, and it adds zero function. And after the initial week or two of you buying it, being very extra proud of the red stitching, it just becomes another thing in the interior they don't care about. This is the problem with how the industry is going. People are demanding things that are irrelevant, just drive the price of the car up, like red stitching all over the interior, which absolutely does nothing. I actually hardly notice it, if at all, when you're driving. And the infotainment system is very proudly sticking out of the dash. This seems to be a trend that the industry is going through. It doesn't feel out of place here, but there's one giant thing with it. It is not a touch screen. You have to use the little rotary dial, which is a disappointment. And speaking of disappointments, potentially the biggest disappointment about this car is the infotainment system. It's not touch. You have to use a very ancient rotary dial to do everything. Look, this works okay if you're using like the stock form entertainment system to listen to radio, whatever the case may be, make a phone call. But when they added Apple CarPlay into the mix, and I've been using it for the week that I've had this car, it is horrendous. I mean, you just refreshed this car. Why couldn't you change this to a touchscreen? I understand if it is a touchscreen, it's a little bit far away because it's not designed to be, but even then, just make it a touchscreen. It's okay, but it's not. And it's really annoying. I mean, yes, we're not going to harp too much about the radio, but this is something you're actually going to use every day. And you dealing with the rotary dial, even though it's a good dial, I have to admit that. But for Apple CarPlay, it gets very annoying because now you're jumping through, it's distracting you from the road. A touchscreen would have been much nicer, honestly. And another thing that is a small disappointment, not the end of the world, but it is the smart key button. Now, most modern cars, you have a touch sensor and another touch sensor somewhere else. So you have the key in your pocket, you put your hand here, and the door unlocks. When you walk away from it, you either touch a place on the sensor that's usually marked on the handle, and it locks. On this, you have a button. That button gets super annoying because now you're trying to push it, and you have to push it just right to lock it and unlock it. Come on, this is something of the past, and you just refreshed this car. You could have gotten rid of this. That's small annoyance, but it does get on your nerve as the more you drive this car. And speaking of the key, now they designed this whole car kind of a timeless design, kind of a less is more, and this beautiful, elegant design and this very functional interior. But that memo did not make it to the key making department because you have this enormous key that has no buttons. The buttons are here on the side. Now, some people will say, oh, that's cool. It's cool. But you know what the problem is? This interferes with function. I cannot tell you during the week that I was driving this car, how many times I have this key in my pocket and I come back to the car like I was somewhere near it. I was kneeling, doing something, working, and then come back to the car. Either the alarm is going or the back door is open or the doors are unlocked because these buttons are actually raised. And when you put it in your pocket and you kneel, you can actually press them. It doesn't make sense. Why couldn't they just put it here? Less is more, Mazda, except for the key. That's what they didn't do. Let's drive the Mazda CX-5. Now, the first thing you notice about this car is how quiet it is. I mean, crossovers in this segment are kind of increasingly getting louder. Like in the case of Toyota and Lexus, you look at the RAV4, the RAV4 is loud, but an NX on the Lexus side is quieter. They need to make that distinction between the regular brand and the premium brand. Well, Mazda doesn't have that. They don't have a premium brand per se. So their cars are still quiet. This is extremely quiet, and that is possibly one of the biggest highlights about the CX-5 driving-wise, which is something I really appreciate. These cars are getting louder and louder, and you get in this, and it's quiet. However, that does come with a small caveat, if you would. So, because this is a small crossover, it still has a short wheelbase, and it's smooth and quiet and refined, but it's bouncy. As you drive it, it's like bouncing around, and it kind of intrudes on you. Normally, if you drive a RAV4, it's similar, but you don't feel it as much because the car is a little louder, it has different personality, but this almost feels like Lexus style quiet, but then the bounciness kind of takes away from that. It just makes it like conflicting character in the drive. Other things about the drive is, this doesn't have a CVT or some 10, 12, 14 speed transmission. Now we're becoming a race of how many speeds we can put. This just has a normal drivetrain. The transmission shifts very smooth. It's not hunting for gears and going all over the place. It's nice. It's the kind of car that you drive and it's not a laborious drive. It's just the transmission shifts very nice, very smooth, doesn't hunt for gears. The engine is not super powerful, but it has enough power where you're not feeling like you're pushing the car all the time. It's just a very nice place to be. Now, one thing about the driving portion of this car, the way you sit a little bit further to the front. The dash is not as wide, it's small, so you feel the windshield is close. But that has a side effect. It's nice because you're basically utilizing the space of the car. Very smart. It feels very roomy. This is a small crossover. This is not a huge crossover. But that comes with a side effect. The A-pillar, it's very wide and it's very big because it has the airbag right here. But when you're making a left-hand turn as a driver, this really blocks your view. I mean, I'm driving this for a week, and there are times that I'm making a left-hand turn. I have to literally go like this or like this just to see where are we heading towards, because the A-pillar position, because of this small dash, it's really obstructing the view. You don't feel like you have that big view. The front view is great, the back view is great, the blind spot is good, but this is kind of a let back because of this forward driving position and a small dash. But other than that, driving the CX-5, it's a very relaxing drive, and I so much appreciate that this thing is quiet. It handles very well for what it is. It's not some sports car, but it does handle very decent. You know, you drive on the highway, you're going at higher speeds. There is not a moment where you feel like, okay, this thing is all over the place and the wind is grabbing it and throwing it left and I can't feel. No, it has a very nicely centered steering feel. It feels refined. It doesn't feel like it's going to scare you. And that's something we appreciate. After all, this is not a sports car. This is a sensible, everyday car for a small family to take their kids, go about their life. And it does that very, very well, with the added benefit of it being quiet. That is really nice, something you don't see in this segment. The Mazda CX-5. I love how this thing was designed right, with the right mentality. Less is more. Even though they just refreshed this, they really didn't change a lot about it. The design is just one of those timeless designs. It not only looks good and striking and all that, it looks elegant. It looks well thought out. This is a car 10 years from now will still look good. The front, the back, usually some cars will look really good in the front and the back will be, This looks actually well. It looks like it was designed by the same person. It flows and it doesn't have too much design elements, but yet it has a very classy and elegant design, and I love it. And the biggest thing to me about the Mazda CX-5 is how quiet it is. Something that you will not see in cars in this segment, because see, when you go into RAV4 or CRV, the CRV is a little bit better than RAV4, but the RAV4 is very loud. Why? Because you have the Lexus. They need to make a distinction. And that kind of translates into the RAV4 being extremely loud. And there is something more important about this. The Fordness of Mazda is disappearing. For those who are not aware, Mazda was actually a very, very innovative company. They used to make really good cars, and they were actually a big company. Then Ford got a hold of them, and Ford knows how to do two things. They invented mass-produced cars, and now they invented how to destroy other companies. They did that with Mazda. They almost took them out completely, because all of a sudden people were used to buying Mazdas that were really good, and now they're horrible, for lack of a better word. But that's long gone, and I've been checking this car out inside and out, and more on the under the hood side. The only sign of Ford that I see is the oil cap. We are making great progress, folks, because there's no Fordness here, and that is really good for reliability. Now, the turbo reliability, that remains a question mark, because their bad history with turbos was happening in the Ford time. We're out of the Ford times. I hope Mazda is back to its root, innovation, good cars that really push the envelope of engineering, and they really do that very well. And I see a lot of those traits in this car. If they would have only done the refresh a little bit better, maybe added a touch screen, maybe got rid of the button on the door, replace it with touch sensors, and a little bit of more important modernization. Not the red stitching, because that doesn't really matter. This is a brilliant car. It just needed a little bit of modernization. They didn't do it. But even with that, I think it is really still a nice car if quiet and not a confused transmission is what you're looking for. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.